Welcome to the video. Many of my musical discoveries have come from buying compilation albums or, back in the day, cheap 12-inch EPs or singles. And the world's changed a lot, hasn't it? Because back in the day, I used to buy a lot of cheap compilations that would give you exposure or expose you to bands and artists that you would ordinarily wouldn't find, you wouldn't catch your attention. And very often there'd be some particular tracks on the compilation that you think, I'm going to discover, I'm going to explore this particular artist a little bit more. And then you go on and hoover up albums and other singles, for example, by those artists, and you'd just be building and building up your collection. That doesn't happen so much these days because, younger consumers often just listen to their music through Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube, or whatever, and they never get around to buying the physical product. I think it's one of the reasons why, probably the main reason why the music industry is in such, the business model is kind of broken, or at least it's very different to what it used to be. Not good for artists, of course. But the band I'm going to talk about today, I first discovered through one of these cheap 12-inch singles, these EPs. And this particular one had four live tracks, and it was an EP by a band called Echo and the Bunnymen, and the EP was called Shine So Hard. And one of the live tracks on this album was called All My Colors. It had a really stark marching beat, and it was very, very dramatic, although on the live version it was a little bit too frantic for my tastes and a little bit too rushed, but no doubt exciting to the audience at the time when it was recorded. Nevertheless, that particular track showed up on an album I'm going to talk about today. And the band is Echo and the Bunnymen, and the album is called Heaven Up Here. Heaven Up Here, released in 1981. So this album was the second after their debut album Crocodiles, and it kind of was much more stark than the strings-laden Ocean Rain and the hit singles that came later, like The Killing Moon. They got a bit syrupy to my taste. I continued to buy the albums, but they just didn't really do that much for me. But this particular album is superb. What does it sound like? Well, it kind of sounds like the cover. It's kind of big, expansive, grand, cold, wintry, not very warm at all. And it kind of reminds me of back when I was back in the Northeast, when I used to do winter walks along the beach at Tynemouth Long Sands, as they call it, with seagulls flying around and dusk approaching. Really, really, really kind of evocative of the winter in my mind. And I mean, all four band members really excel here. I mean, the singer, Ian McCulloch, has got a big, rich voice. Apparently, at the time, very charismatic, and then apparently he would be the first one to tell you that he was very charismatic with a fantastic stage presence. And then you had the late Pete DeFreitas on drums, which has really had this kind of marching staccato type drumming. Little bit of hi-hat, not much in the way of cymbals. So it kind of reminds me just a little bit of the drumming on Peter Gabriel's third solo album. It's kind of rat-a-tat-tat, but really very, very, very dynamic. Well, Les Pattinson's bass is low, rumbling. It's high in the mix. It's kind of a little bit melodic. I mean, a lot of bands actually mix down the bass to kind of keep it fairly hidden, but this is very, very prominent. In fact, all of the four musicians on this album are prominent. They have equal prominence in the music. And then you had Will Sargent's guitar, which was very dynamic, very staccato, no solos. So it's very precise in his sound. And the whole thing has an air around it where you get the sense of space. It's very, very well recorded. It's very, very, very clear, very clean, very clinical. It's a bit like post-punk music, but it's not pop. It's not super fast. Sometimes it's incredibly slow, but very, very atmospheric. Wonderful, wonderful music. The whole album kind of works kind of late night, but also it has this dynamism about it that really is enjoyable when you play the whole thing loud as well. I can't understand why I never actually saw Echo and the Bunnymen live. They were around at the time. I remember as an old friend of mine who's sadly departed now, who we used to go to a lot of gigs together, but some of the gigs I didn't attend, and I forever kind of wonder why, and I regret. So bands like, he saw early on What the Hoople, Queen in the early days, Patti Smith Group, and of course Echo and the Bunnymen, and there's a whole host of others as well. So what are the highlights? Well, the whole thing sounds great. There's not that many. I wouldn't say it really standout tracks where you'd say, oh, that's the great single. I mean, there was a single. The last track on side one is A Promise, which was kind of back in '81 was it charted. It wasn't really a pop song though. I mean, none of this is really pop, as I've already mentioned, but it starts in grand fashion with the show of strength kind of emerging from the silence with a low rumbling, and then becomes really, really big sounding, but always under control by the band. Over the Wall is a highlight, which is reminiscent a little bit of All My Colours that I've already mentioned. The Disease is really short, quiet, again, very, very atmospheric, as is Turquoise Days, and All I Want was kind of a little bit of a return to something a little bit melodic as well, more melodic. But I just love this cover. Just love this cover, as I've said many times before. So who should listen to Heaven Up Here? Well, I'm struggling. I've really struggled to identify bands who sound like Echo and the Bunnymen. I mean, they were renowned for being fans of the Doors. I think that was Ian McCulloch, kind of some sort of a ego thing where he saw himself as some sort of a Jim Morrison figure. And they did record on a later album a version of People Are Strange. But the Doors, if you remember, the Doors, they're much more. The blues is really strong influence in the Doors music. All of their albums have some blues tracks on them. Some very obviously so, very classic. But there's no blues in this. This is really, really modern sounding back in the for the post-punk era. Yeah, I'm struggling to think of bands that sound like Echo and the Bunnymen. I think they have this kind of almost unique sound. Now, sure, there's the post-punk influence. I'm thinking of bands like Gang of Four, thinking of bands like Magazine, where there's a little bit of that. But I think those bands hung on to their punk roots more than Echo and the Bunnymen did. Bunnymen were altogether more precise, more musical, grander, more comfortable with the silences and slowing the music down. And the music always reminds me of the winter, and it's kind of perfect for those winter days where there's frost on the ground, or it's a light dusting of snow. You're walking the park, you're staring out the window when the hi-fi's playing, and you're all in your overcoats, just like the band are on the album cover. It's kind of very much a winter feel, and of course the more melodic, pop orientated stuff that they did later on certainly it has a more all year round feel, if you like. But for me, this is the winter album. This is why I recommend Heaven Up Here. So that's what I've got to say about Heaven Up Here. Great album, great band. Regret forever not having seen them live. I know that they became more poppy later on and more popular, but this is the album for me. This is the album that I keep going back to. So it's heartily recommended. Echo and the Bunnymen, Heaven Up Here. See you on the next video.